عليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
How are you, Professor Khalid?
الحمد لله الحمد لله.
Alhamdulillah. Let's begin with you, please. If you can give us your presentation, between 10 and 15 minutes, that will be great.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for inviting me. Well, I'm sure as the audience knows that the issue of Sharia has been recurring now for a good decade, at least. And recently, we have seen politicians in Texas and Florida, especially Texas, run on anti-Sharia platforms. Um, uh, the critical point, though, to cut to the heart of the matter, is this begs a question: to what extent are these politicians? To what extent is the anti-Sharia movement in the United States? To what extent the states who had passed anti-Sharia bills, to what extent are they, do they suffer from a Sharia knowledge deficit? To what extent is the problem that such politicians, such movements, such political momentums are ill-informed about Sharia? And I would submit to you that, in fact, knowledge of Sharia is not the issue in these political movements. That type of ideological orientation is not healed by becoming instructed on the finer points of Sharia or on even understanding the basic foundations of Sharia law or any such thing. The proof of this is that when there are efforts, and I have been engaged in these efforts now for quite a while, to address the knowledge deficit on part of these organizations or on part of the politicians running on anti-Sharia bills, when you, in fact, engage them and challenge their generalizations, their very stereotypical and quite prejudiced, quite bigoted statements about Sharia, the response is simply to wave your discourse away as if it is irrelevant. In fact, to just simply say, go to the stereotypical position that whatever you are representing Sharia to be, it's a lie, that you are basically deceiving them or involved in some type of stealth Islamist conspiracy. The issue, in my view, is fundamentally racial. That these politicians, such political movements, are ideologically very much like colonialism itself, very much like ideological orientations of exclusion, ideological orientations that define Americana in very culturally specific ways. The anti-Sharia discourse is a proxy for a racist discourse that in its foundations does not like, well, first, it exoticizes the Muslim, it others the Muslim, it imagines the Muslim to be the other, whatever the other is. it fundamentally is premised on the Muslim being a racially and ethnically different category of person, and the very superficially intellectualized way of saying we do not want the other is to resort to quote unquote an anti-Sharia position. Put it differently. I have been a student of Sharia all my life, and now in my 60s, I haven't scratched the surface. And any specialist in the Sharia tradition would recognize how nuanced and how rich and how complicated the concept and the tradition and the culture of Sharia is. But this is neither here nor there when we are dealing with the type of ideological trope that we confront in the anti-Sharia movement. Muslims have been for long racialized in the Western imagination. Uh, Muslims have been referred to at different times in the Western imagination as Saracens, Moors, Turks, um, all which are racial designations that basically say the Muslim is the culturally opposite of who we are. And that's exactly what the anti-Sharia movement is. It is not based on any real knowledge of Sharia. It is not based on any, and in fact, uh, you notice that the anti-Sharia movement, even at the state levels or at the levels of politicians running in Texas or running in Florida, affirmatively avoid any learned texts, even those written by Western writers, even those that come from the field of Islamic studies. Let's just say uh, uh, a text written by someone like George Maqdisi, or a text written even by most basic introductory text to the field of Sharia. None of these movements have any use for this type of knowledge. I think that the sooner we deal with the fact that these ideological movements are fundamentally racist movements, they are basically, in their nutshell, avoid the excluding Muslims from public spaces, demonizing Muslims in being involved in public spaces. It's not a coincidence that while there is that every anti-Sharia movement is simultaneously, especially these days, simultaneously is also an anti-political Islam movement, is also an anti-Islamist movement, is also more specifically a demonization of the Muslim Brotherhood, uh, and a premised on or adopts conspiracy theories that American Muslim civic organizations like CARE are fronts for the Muslim Brotherhood, and even a more recent edition that I just heard from some Israeli scholars, um, that Erdogan of Turkey uh, Erdogan is himself a front for the Muslim Brotherhood, and that and that the Muslim Brotherhood and Erdogan want to restore the Ottoman Caliphate, and that the next major enemy are the Turks, because we have to fight off the recreation of the Ottoman Caliphate. These are fundamentally the movements that adopt anti-Sharia platforms. Let me just add this. I have a colleague at UCLA Law who's actually conservative. He's on the right wing of things. His name is Eugene Volokh. And Eugene Volokh engaged his conservative circles. He is a constitutional law professor, and he engages conservative circles in a more rational, learned discourse as to whether Sharia can ever be a real threat to the United States. Basically, he was talking about choice of law issues, whether it is conceivable that there is a scenario where, uh, or under what circumstances would an American court be in the business of accommodating or implementing Sharia law, however defined, and in precisely under what context, what circumstance, the technicalities of choice of law issues. And he wrote an article which he published that basically goes through the technicalities of this, concluding that something that we already know, that Sharia law, even if people enter a contract, for instance, and they choose Sharia law as their choice of law, in other words, that they resolve a dispute according to Sharia law, or if people enter into a prenuptial agreement and there's a Sharia law choice of law provision in there, that we have in the United States a very long jurisprudence that in choice of law matters, if the law you choose violates American public policy, what in the American legal system is considered to be against American public policy, then American courts do not implement foreign law, not just limited to Sharia law, but basically foreign law. If foreign law violates American public policy, American courts will not implement it. And so, speaking to his fellow conservatives, he then basically says, I don't understand this entire anti Sharia movement because it is very difficult to conceive of a situation where an American court would have to treat Sharia law or any foreign law as supreme. And of course, as I expected, to his surprise, but not to mine, conservative circles that he was addressing this discourse to completely ignored them. Completely didn't, were not interested in engaging the finer points of choice of law matters, because fundamentally, this anti-Sharia movement is a polite way, or not so polite, but basically is a politically acceptable way of saying we don't like Muslims, we want to exclude Muslims from public spaces. Racism, like Islamophobia, like anti Semitism, is fundamentally an irrational dynamic. It is premised on lack of reason and premised, it's founded on intentional ignorance. And with this type of problem, shaming is, in my view, to expose and to shame racism for what it is the most effective way of trying to counter racism. I will close with this. I don't think any of those involved in the anti-Sharia movements or those politicians who run on anti-Sharia platforms, I don't think that any of them are seriously worried about choice of law matters in matters of family law, for instance. I don't think any of them lose sleep as to whether Muslims are going to inherit one another according to the specific details of Islamic law versus what would normally happen under uh, normal inheritance situations. I don't think any of them are in any serious way concerned about how interest rates are compounded or whether how uh, 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 lost profits in a contract dispute are calculated. Sort of the technical points that usually we see choice of law matters, where there's an economic dispute and they say, well, the way we calculate interest is in the following fashion. What you often hear are things that have no place in law, like, for instance, talking about jihad and talking about Islamic government and talking about the caliphate, uh, things that rationally do not follow from choice of law matters. Often, the whole purpose of the anti-Sharia discourse is to create dread, basic irrational fear, as if this 1% of the population, even if we assume that this 1% are some type of rabid anti-constitutional zealots, who will take seriously the idea that this 1% can overthrow and the US Constitution, even if they wanted to? It's fundamentally an irrational premise. Imagine if you turn the tables, imagine a Muslim country with a 1% population of Christians, for instance, starting to beat the drums on the danger posed by this 1% to an Islamic state. Anyone would immediately say, that's a red herring. You are using this as an excuse to persecute a minority. Yet that simple, obvious logic, when it comes to the US and anti-Sharia, uh, you rarely find it raised. You rarely find the dynamics of shaming, of saying, what are you talking about? You are clearly trying to persecute a tiny minority in your midst. And we have to recognize that as Muslims, we are a tiny minority in a country like the United States. I think more recently, as we hear, as as we see states like Texas and Florida designate CARE as a terrorist organization, as we hear the drumbeats being beat about CARE being a front for the Muslim Brotherhood, which is an absurd proposition and an absurd argument, and that the Muslim Brotherhood, Turkey, Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah are somehow all bundled together in one bundle that contains not just Hamas, Hezbollah, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Ottoman Empire, and Sharia, and political Islam, and all Islamists, basically all representing what is bad and what is foreign and what creates dread in the Western mind, in the same way that the Turk, the Saracen, the Moor would create dread in the Western mind. It is time, in my view, that we call this what it is: racism, pure and simple. Thank you very much.